Hello. Hey, I wanted to come on here today. I've been having several discussions with people lately about having a paraprofessional and how that fits into the least restrictive environment. It seems to be about a 50-50 split. Some people think it's more restrictive. Some people think it's less restrictive. And honestly, I think it can be both. In my personal opinion, and in my experience, I have worked with some paraprofessionals that overhelped and did more than they should have been doing for the student or students that they were assigned to. But I've also worked with some amazing paraprofessionals, teacher assistants, classroom aides, whatever the terminology, educator assistant, whatever the terminology is in your area, who have been absolutely astounding in how they supported the student or students that they were assigned to. There's a lot of thinking behind how this works. Some people say that having an adult next to a child is more restrictive, period. They don't really go into any further explanation. That's just all they say. Some people will further explain that to say that that's going to draw attention. That's going to have the other students looking down on the student with the assistant. That's going to create over dependence. And I'm sure there are a lot of other reasons. Those are the main ones that I hear most often. I also agree with that, that you can have that situation. Depending on the age of the student, depending on the ability level of the student, depending on the class size, there are so many variables to whether or not I would recommend a classroom assistant. I don't like to say absolutely not or absolutely yes for any accommodation or any related service. And the reason I put those things together is in some states, they count a paraprofessional as a accommodation. In some states, they count it as a related service. It's not specifically listed that it can go in either category or both categories. So you may find that it's discussed in different areas depending on where you are. Anything that we discuss should be thought about individualistically, not just individual to the child, but individual. If you're assigning an individual aid, you really have to think about that individual person. What kind of training will they need? Who is going to follow up and make sure that they are adhering to the training? Who is going to make sure that the child and the adult are getting along well? There are lots of dynamics that go into whether or not a para is more restrictive or less restrictive. You can certainly, from my experience, have an aide, as I said, who is extreme. And notice how I keep interchanging the terms, and I apologize for that. But I know they're just called so many different things that I'm so used to saying them in so many different ways. So I hope I'm not confusing you. This whole conversation is about not the teacher, not the student, but that other adult that is in the room and is helping, whatever you call that person in your area. So I want you, when you are going into an IEP meeting, whether you are a teacher, a parent, a therapist, an admin, I want you to think about the individual student and the individual person that might be working with that. So we have a question. What if you have a 10th grader who is performing at elementary school level? Without having a ton more information, my answer, and it could change if I had more information, but I think you'd really have to discuss it. You'd really have to talk about how the student is going to be perceived socially, because at 10th grade, having that other person could be very detrimental to their social abilities. So what is more concern? Is it the social concern or is it the academic concern? Is this 10th grader able to verbalize how they would feel? And can this 10th grader understand why they might benefit and what the pros and cons are? So Kim, I think it's one that you would want to discuss as much as possible with the student first and foremost, and then with the whole team. I can't say definitely one way or the other. And that's the nature of everything, to be perfectly honest, that we talk about in an IEP, because we're talking about an individual education program, individualized education program. I know that in a lot of districts where I have worked, having an individual aide with a student or several students, and an aide assigned to several students, has been extremely helpful for them to keep them in the general education classroom, because they're getting the instruction from the expert in that content, whatever that content is, whether it's particular grade level content like you might have in elementary grades, or whether it's subject level content like you might have in the middle and high school grades. That person has the experience, has the degree or the endorsement specifically in those areas. The special education teacher's expertise, and I'm going to tell you, the first time I heard those words, that I was not an expert and that the students should stay with the gen ed teacher as much as possible because they were the expert, I was offended as a special ed teacher. However, I get it now, because my area of expertise was making modifications and accommodations and teaching differently and figuring out my students versus understanding content, subject, or grade level material. So I just wanted, I just had a connection reach out to me, and she said that someone had told her that there were some people in her area that were saying, don't ask for an individual aide or a paraprofessional because that's a more restrictive environment and the school is automatically going to turn you down. We can't just, what about just in resources? Can you clarify that, Kim? I don't quite understand what you're asking me. We have to look individually. We cannot blanketly say no to this every single time. Paraprofessionals can be extremely helpful. They need to be trained. They need to be trained how to work with students with different disabilities, but they need to be trained how to work with children, mostly, because that's what our kids are in our classrooms. They're children. And then on top of being a child, they have a learning style. And then on top of having a learning style, they may have a disability. They may learn differently. So there's a lot of ways that these can work, but the training has to be there. So is it more restrictive or least restrictive? It depends. And I know that's not the answer that you were probably hoping for when you saw the title of this, but that is truly the case. It really does depend. Just like every accommodation depends, every goal depends, every present levels of performance depends. That's why it's called an individualized education program. That's why it's an IEP. That's why the law is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, because we need to look at every single person individually, not what fits into our school program, not what we think as parents necessarily. We need to be open, and we need to have good communication with our team, and we need to work with each other. And remember, at the center of our discussion is a student. And if at all possible, we want the student to be involved. And we're trying to prepare that student for further education, employment, and independent living while providing FAPE and meeting their unique needs. Kim, I don't understand still what about just in resources. If that was supposed to be, if just and in were supposed to be separated, and yes, that can be under resources category. So Kim, if you want to reach out to me separately and I can talk to you a little bit more about that, I would greatly appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, one way or the other about this, This is what I love to do. I love to help you figure out what is best. Nope, sorry, the law does not say best. What is appropriate and reasonable for your child in their education, for your student in your classroom. Paras can be great, paras can be detrimental. We've got to work together to figure it out. Catch you next time, guys.